When you see them walking down the aisle, what do you think you're going to feel?
Great joy, because the last time we were in Westminster Abbey, my heart sank when I saw those two boys walking behind the.
In moments stolen from the world's gaze, their laughter was a private symphony. In the quiet shadows of life's unbearable weight, they were each other's comfort. But behind the veil of those smiles, there was a profound silence. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of heartbreak, the weight of pride, and the sting of regret. And for years, Elton John guarded its truth. The truth about the sacred bond he shared with Princess Diana, and the devastating pain that nearly fractured it forever. Now, at long last, he is ready to tell the story that would irrevocably change both of their lives. It begins on a fateful night, in the long, hot summer of 1981. It was a year destined to be etched into the very soul of British history. Prince Charles was preparing to wed a shy, young nursery school assistant by the name of Diana Spencer. An entire nation was swept up in the grand illusion of a fairy tale. But for Elton John, already one of the most recognizable musicians on the planet, that year signified something far more intimate, far more personal, the genesis of a friendship that would redefine his world. By then, Elton had become a familiar presence within the hallowed halls of the monarchy. The Queen Mother herself was a devotee of his music, and Princess Margaret, a royal known for her maverick spirit, often welcomed him to clandestine gatherings at Kensington Palace. He had performed for the highest echelons of aristocracy, dined with dukes, and even exchanged wry pleasantries with Prince Philip, who once teased him about the spectacle of his bright, yellow Aston Martin cutting a path through the stoic grounds of Windsor. And yet, despite the shimmering veneer of it all, Elton never truly felt he belonged in those circles. That all changed on one indelible night, at the 21st birthday party for Prince Andrew, held deep within the fortress of Windsor Castle. The ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal chandeliers, heirloom jewels, and rigid royal decorum. Elton, dressed by his own flamboyant standards with a quiet modesty, sat at a grand piano, a soft melody drifting from his fingertips as the titled guests mingled. He would later confess to feeling a profound nervousness, an outsider adrift in a sea of lords and ladies. Then, as his eyes scanned the room, he saw her. Diana Spencer had just arrived, young, impossibly radiant, and not yet the princess the world was waiting for. The very atmosphere seemed to shift. She had an incredible social ease, Elton would later recall in his autobiography, Me, an ability to make anyone feel completely comfortable in her company. In that moment, across the gilded ballroom, their eyes met. He offered a polite smile, and she returned it with a warmth that cut through all the formality. Within moments, the two were lost in conversation, like the oldest of friends, laughing at the stuffy music. And then they were in the middle of the ballroom, playfully miming the Charleston, a moment so utterly spontaneous, so wonderfully absurd, that it captured the attention of the Queen herself, who offered a rare, knowing smile. Elton would later say of that first encounter, "I felt as if I'd known her forever." For Diana, that unguarded charm and humor was a lifeline. She stood just weeks away from marrying into a family that was the very architecture of duty, of structure, and of silence. A world where her every gesture would soon be dissected by the press. For Elton, she was a revelation refreshingly real, completely unpretentious, quick-witted, and brimming with an almost startling empathy. She was fabulous company, he remembered, the best dinner guest. Incredibly indiscreet, and a real gossip, he'd add, but she cared so deeply about people. From that one night, their bond began to forge itself in earnest. They were two outsiders, each in a world of their own making. He, the brilliant, flamboyant musician, living under the constant glare of scrutiny for who he was. And she, a woman on the verge of sacrificing her very freedom to the altar of the royal institution. They recognized each other's pain and offered solace without judgment. That profound, mutual understanding, born from a shared, silly dance in a castle, would evolve into one of the most enduring friendships of the 20th century. Neither of them, in that moment of pure joy, could have possibly known it was also destined to end in unimaginable tragedy, and that one day Elton's voice would be the one chosen to say the final goodbye for them both. It was a friendship tested by the blinding light of fame. Throughout the 1980s and the dawn of the 1990s, Elton John and Princess Diana became inseparable, bound by a connection that very few people around them could ever truly understand. Their lives were a spectacle, lived under the relentless glare of 1,000 flashbulbs. Yet, behind the screaming headlines, a quiet friendship was being forged in honesty and shared vulnerability. Whenever they were seen, whether gracing charity galas, royal functions, or sold-out concerts, the cameras captured a portrait of effortless joy, of smiles and knowing laughter. But what the public could never photograph, what remained unseen, was the deep, private compassion that was the very architecture of their bond. Elton often remarked that Diana possessed a rare gift. She could make the most powerful people on earth feel seen, feel at ease, even as she herself seldom found a moment of peace. She was a woman caught in the cross-currents of expectation and emotion, of royalty and raw humanity, as the 1980s unfolded around her. The storybook marriage to Prince Charles grew cold, and the whispers grew loud rumors of affairs, of an unbridgeable distance, of a quiet despair that filled the pages of the daily papers. Within the gilded cage of Kensington Palace, Diana was suffocating beneath the immense weight of royal formality. It was a loneliness Elton understood all too well. For behind his own dazzling costumes and global fame, he was fighting his own wars in the shadows with addiction and the persistent ghost of self-doubt. And under the crushing burden of constant scrutiny, they recognized a kindred pain in each other. From this recognition, an unspoken, unbreakable trust was forged. Their friendship blossomed in the crucible of these difficult years. Diana became a fixture at Elton's charity events, especially those championing AIDS awareness. It was a cause that burned brightly in both their hearts, at a moment in history when the stigma surrounding the illness was a plague of its own. In a stunning act of defiance against royal protocol, Diana visited patients, shaking their hands and offering embraces without the shield of gloves. Elton would later say that this single act forever altered the public's perception of AIDS. It was in that moment he truly understood the depth of her fearlessness. She wasn't concerned with image or palace gossip. Her currency was compassion. But there were lighter times, too, moments illuminated by Diana's mischievous sense of humor. It was a wit that perfectly mirrored Elton's. She delighted in teasing him about his flamboyant wardrobe, while he marveled at her ability to transform royal stiffness into disarming charm. Elton recalled parties where her laughter would fill the room, or she'd roll her eyes in a shared, silent joke about the aristocracy's snobbery. But wherever she went, a certain kind of chaos seemed to follow. One evening, at an intimate dinner party in London, both Richard Gere and Sylvester Stallone were among the guests. And as the night wore on, both actors became utterly infatuated with Diana, a situation that rapidly escalated into what Elton called a near fist fight over her attention. She could bring Hollywood superstars to the verge of a punch-up, he later wrote. They were, quite simply, bewitched. Yet even as she commanded the adoration of crowds and the attention of movie stars, Diana's private life remained a landscape of quiet heartbreak. She wrestled with bulimia, with the profound loneliness of sleepless nights, and a persistent, aching feeling of being unloved. Elton would visit, sometimes just to sit in the quiet and listen. No cameras, no audience, just two friends seeking refuge from the noise. But as their fame grew, so did the pressure. Diana's world became a treacherous maze of manipulation and palace politics, and Elton found himself worrying about her constantly. He knew how fragile a thing like trust could be in that environment. By the early 1990s, they were like siblings, joking, arguing, and leaning on one another. But with such a profound affection, occasional conflict was inevitable, fanned by the flames of fame, pride, and utter exhaustion. The pressure began to chip away at the edges of their bond, and soon a misunderstanding would plunge their friendship into its darkest hour. It was a rift that neither of them would ever forget. By the mid-1990s, the alliance of Elton John and Princess Diana had become one of the most chronicled bonds between a celebrity and a royal. Together, they had weathered the fiercest of media storms. They had found laughter in the midst of scandal and supported each other in ways the world would never comprehend. But in 1996, something shifted, something that would tear their friendship apart, leaving both of them wounded and shrouded in silence. It all began with a project for charity. This was a project that meant the world to Elton, a labor of love he had been pouring his soul into, a coffee table book of rock photography. It was a glamorous collection of images, a pantheon of musicians, performers, and artists, with every single proceed dedicated to an AIDS foundation. Diana had agreed to write the foreword. This was never just a favor. It was a powerful statement from a woman who had long been a champion for AIDS awareness. She was breaking taboos, giving a human face to a disease many still feared. For Elton, having her name grace the project was both a profound honor and a potent symbol of compassion. Then, like a sudden shift in the wind, she withdrew. A letter arrived, bearing the crest of Diana's office. The tone was polite, but the message was distant. She explained, with formal regret, that she could no longer participate. The reason, as Elton would later learn, was the cold shadow of royal disapproval. Advisors from within Buckingham Palace had objected to her involvement in a book that featured images of semi-clothed male models. They were repulsed by the very idea of a member of the royal family being associated with that kind of raw artistic imagery. To Elton, as he recalled it, the news felt like a deep and personal betrayal, not from a princess, but from a friend he thought he could count on. Years later, under the hot lights of Larry King Live, Elton admitted, "I wasn't too happy. And I let her know that." He sent her a message, his disappointment etched into every word. Diana, feeling cornered by forces beyond her control, responded with what he could only describe as a terse, clipped letter. It was sharp, cold, and devastatingly final. After that, there was only silence. For months, the line between them went dead. Elton confessed he was deeply, profoundly hurt. It wasn't because of her decision, but because of the chilling distance that had fallen between them. Diana, meanwhile, was weathering her own private hurricane. Her divorce from Prince Charles had just been finalized in August of 1996. She had lost her royal title, Her Royal Highness, and with those words, a piece of her identity had been stripped away. The press hounded her relentlessly, and the palace offered no sanctuary. Surrounded by people with conflicting agendas, she began to question who she could possibly trust. Elton believed that palace advisors had engineered her withdrawal, but privately, a small part of him wondered if she had simply grown weary of being connected to other people's causes. Whatever the reason, the fracture was complete. Two people who had once shared everything, laughter, grief, even secrets about the monarchy were now, suddenly, strangers. "It was awful," Elton later said. "We'd always been honest with each other, but pride got in the way." He admitted, with a heavy heart, that he could have called her, but didn't. "We were both too proud," he confessed. And before they could fix it, it was too late. For almost an entire year, the silence between them grew heavier, an unspoken weight in both their lives. Behind closed doors, Elton continued his work, and Diana tried to rebuild her own life as an independent humanitarian. Yet both of them carried the quiet, aching wound of a friendship left unresolved. Neither could have known that time was running out, that fate was about to orchestrate their reunion under the shadow of another, even greater tragedy. The Call After Versace. On the 15th of July, 1997, the world lost a titan of design. Gianni Versace, one of Diana and Elton's closest mutual friends, was shot and killed outside his sun-drenched Miami Beach mansion. The news sent a shockwave of grief across the globe. Both Elton and Diana were shattered. She had modeled one of Versace's iconic gowns for Harper's Bazaar back in 1991. And adored him as a true friend and confidant. After his murder, Diana reportedly turned to her bodyguard and asked, "Do you think they'll do that to me?" It was a chilling foreshadowing of the darkness to come. At Versace's funeral in Milan, amidst a sea of mourners, Diana spotted Elton, sitting alone in his grief. A chasm of silence had stretched for months between them, yet, amidst the sea of mourners, she moved toward him, her hand reaching out to bridge the divide. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was silly, our falling out. Let's be friends again." For Elton, as he would later recall, those simple words were a profound absolution that touched him to his very core. But then, in a flash of that spirit only Diana possessed, She shattered the solemnity with a spark of humor, the words of comfort still warm on her lips. The profound sentiment he remembered her offering at that exact moment was, in fact, "God, I'd love a polo." Laughter escaped them both, a sound of life in a place of sorrow, and in that moment, their friendship was resurrected. They made plans, promises of a future reunion, soon. But fate, in its cruel calculus, had allotted them only 6 short weeks. That promised meeting would never come to pass, and then came the night the world stood still. In the pre-dawn stillness of August 31st, 1997, a jarring sound sliced through the quiet, the mechanical whine of a fax machine, delivering a message from the darkness. "So sorry to hear about this awful news." The words were cryptic. Confused, he turned on the television and watched as the world collapsed into a silent, flickering horror. Princess Diana was gone, taken in a brutal crash in a Paris tunnel, hounded through the Pont de l'Alma. She was only 36 years old. For Elton, the news was an obliteration. "It felt unreal," he would later say, "the memory still so vivid. Just weeks earlier, we'd been laughing together at Gianni's funeral, and now she was gone." A request came from the Spencer family, a burden of honor he could not refuse, to perform at her funeral. He turned to his lifelong lyricist, Bernie Taupin, and together they began the sacred work of reworking the lyrics of their 1973 song, "Candle in the Wind." A melody once meant for Marilyn Monroe was now transformed. Its new life began with a heartbreaking farewell. "Goodbye, England's rose, may you ever grow in our hearts." On September 6, 1997, under the ancient arches of Westminster Abbey, Elton sat before a world in mourning. He remembered his hands trembling as he began to sing. This was not a performance, it was a eulogy set to music. There was a palpable sense that for 4 minutes, an entire planet held its breath. "The world was watching me," he later reflected. "But it wasn't about me. It was about time's her asterisk." The single version of Candle in the Wind 1997 became the best-selling record in history, with over 33 million copies sold. Yet, Elton confessed he never felt an ounce of pride in it. "Why would anyone want to listen to it?" he asked. To him, the entire thing felt morbid. It was never something he could celebrate. For the man who sang it, it was not a hit record. It was a wound that would never truly heal. The legacy and the truth. Years fell away, but a promise made in private was never forgotten. His vow to protect Diana's sons. When Prince Harry faced a similar, relentless media storm decades later, Elton's voice rose in his defense. "I feel a deep sense of duty to protect Harry and his family from the very press intrusion that led to Diana's death." To this day, he remains a steadfast, private guardian to both princes. He often hosts them in the sanctuary of his home, yet Elton later admitted their brief estrangement in the 1990s was a ghost that haunted him for years. "If I could go back," he confessed, the regret still audible in his voice, "I would have picked up the phone. I would have just said sorry." Life's too short for pride. He also offered a glimpse into the unseen forces at play, revealing his belief that Diana's decision to withdraw from their charity project was not entirely her own. He felt it may have been influenced by pressure from the palace, a chilling reminder of the invisible currents that so often directed the course of her life. Theirs was a friendship that defied all convention, a princess and a rock star, two souls from different worlds, bound together not by status but by a shared loneliness and the solace of laughter. Through his eyes, the world was gifted a portrait of Diana that was never meant for public view, unpolished, unrehearsed. A woman who joked and cried and swore like anyone else. And through her, Elton rediscovered a deeper compassion, a renewed purpose that would transform him into one of the world's most formidable voices in AIDS advocacy and humanitarian work. Even today, when he plays the piano and a hush falls over the crowd, there is a momentary pause, and somewhere, suspended in that silence, her memory endures. In the quiet moments, they say he can still hear her laughter, a sound that underscored his belief that she was living proof that kindness and honesty could exist, even in a world sculpted from illusion and image. This very essence is what made her unforgettable. Their friendship wasn't a performance, it was a sanctuary, built on a foundation of unvarnished truth. A bond tragically fractured by a moment of pride, only to be made eternal through the power of a single song. Now, Decades later, the world still feels the weight of that loss, and Elton, he carries her memory within him, like a solitary flame that time itself cannot extinguish. And it leaves us to wonder, was their bond a design of destiny, or was it the simple, profound story of two lost souls who found a fragile refuge in the blinding storm of fame? If this chronicle resonated with you, we invite you to share your reflections below and subscribe to continue our journey into the untold histories that lie in the shadows of the legends.